democracy doesn't work the way that we've been told it works. Does my voice matter? No. Do you think we can hold the powerful to account at the moment? Because if they want people like us to be scared of actually trying to find the truth, I say hell no to that.
I've been following you. I've been following Bellingcat for a while in part because you guys have broken some pretty damn serious news stories using techniques that are frankly, well, cutting edge, but also kind of mind-blowing. I mean, uncovering FSB agents trying to kill someone in the UK and finding out who they are. I mean, it's just like chef's kiss beautiful when you put these guys on blast. And honestly, I'm actually kind of surprised that you haven't been targeted or whacked by Putin yet. I mean, he's not even the only enemy that you've made doing this stuff. So why don't you tell us what Bellingcat is, first of all?
So Bellingcat does something called open source investigation. So really, this wasn't something that was really possible in this way until the early 2010s. And it's all thanks to smartphone technology, social media, and the wealth of information we have online. Stuff like Google Maps giving you satellite imagery, like ship tracking websites, plane tracking websites, all kinds of information that's accessible to you now. So I started doing this in 2012 as a hobby and kind of arguing with people on the internet, but looking at videos coming from Syria and trying to understand what they were actually showing. I didn't speak a word of Arabic, so I focused on the arms and munitions being used in the conflicts, because early on they were kind of really weird and wild stuff being used. There was one I remember was basically a potato gun, but it fired Molotov cocktails instead of potatoes. And he saw one video of that, so I suspect it wasn't very successful. But early on,
the guy who used it caught on fire on the third round, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, it was just a ball of flame that shot out the end of this tube, so it wasn't very useful.
What could go wrong?
But yeah. I just got really obsessed with the idea in Syria that there was, so much information that was being shared online by kind of opposition groups, media centers, and all kinds of different people on the ground that was just being ignored by the mainstream media. And that was understandable. There was a notorious case early on in Syria where there was a blogger called Gay Girl in Damascus who turned out to be a white guy in America, but they were widely cited in multiple mainstream newspapers. And the media had lost trust in those kind of sources. So I was frustrated that there was very clearly good stuff in there that was being ignored. So I just tried to figure out, how can you prove if a video is filmed somewhere? And I realized that you could compare landmarks visible in the video with satellite imagery and do a kind of spot the difference thing. Now that's a technique known as geolocation, but back then it was just me, playing adult spot the difference on social media platforms.
Yeah.
So that then just became a bit of an obsession of mine. I started blogging and found stories from Syria about chemical weapon use and war crimes and all kinds of different things. And more people getting interested in open source investigation, which is what I kind of accidentally stumbled across. And then I launched Bellingcat in July 2014. And the intention there was to show people how to do these investigations and give them a platform where they could publish their own investigations. And that was really kind of the starting ethos of Bellingcat.
What's the mission? The ethos is great. What is the mission? Is it like uncovering news stories that other journalists can't find? What sort of would you say is the core mission of Bellingcat itself?
Well, for me, it's really about taking open source investigation and getting as many people as possible to use it. We don't just do the investigations, but we also do education. We do run workshops. We work with universities to design course material for students. We work with a whole variety of NGOs, media partners with investigations, partly to support their own investigative work, but to teach them these techniques as well. I think there's something that's really, really valuable. I think when we live in an era where the truth is constantly contested, especially on the internet, it's good to have something where you can not only point to the evidence, but the actual process you use to come to your conclusions and open it up for debate. And I think in this era, it's really important that we have places where you can do that, because there is a tendency for people just to read stuff that reinforces what they already believe. And that causes a lot of problems.
Sure does, yeah. So you weren't in a newsroom, you weren't in a war zone, you're in your PJs with a laptop, which I can relate. When did the hobby turn into a global investigative force? And don't worry, folks, we're going to get to geolocation and how that works, because it's a pretty cool little set of techniques. But I'm curious when your PJ thing. I'm curious when the PJ mission turned into we needed office. And by the way, who else makes up Bellingcat? This is not just you and your Twitter handle, right?
Well, yeah, now we have about 40 staff members from across the world. They work on a range of investigations. We've just actually published one today about a non-consensual Nudify app that you can use to remove clothes from the women in your life if you want. So that's kind of one strand,
Or the
that
men,
non-consensual
equal opportunity
pornography. Or
sexual
the men, yeah,
harassment.
that's true.
Yeah,
That's fair enough.
yeah.
But early on, it was really just me working by myself. But Bellingcat was launched on July 14th, 2014, and then 3 days later, Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine, and that became a huge catalyst both for the growth of Bellingcat, but open source investigation in general.
Oh, wow.
And from that point onwards, I started building a team of investigators who were really just interesting people online I was kind of talking to who seemed to get what I was doing and could do it themselves. And we just kind of formed an informal team, and then we just kind of took Bellingcat from really just a volunteer blog to the organization it is today.
How do you give us like a digital gumshoe 101 blow by blow of a day hunting, I don't know, war crimes armed with public posts and probably a shitload of caffeine?
Yes, that's definitely part of it. So with MH17, for example, you have an incident that happens. There's lots of people online discussing it, arguing about it. Some people are finding links to posts that are seemingly relevant, and that's kind of the first kind of thing you're gathering. You're trying to find, what people are sharing, where it's being shared, dig into that. Just kind of look at that kind of network of information that's emerging from the incident. But that is
so
usually very chaotic.
MH17 to be clear, this is a Malaysian Airlines flight that got downed over Ukraine, correct?
Yeah, so it was flying over eastern Ukraine, and then it was shot down from the sky. And the debate was who shot it down, first of
I
all.
see.
Was it
Okay.
Russia or was it Ukraine? So both sides blamed each other, and immediately there were online arguments about it. There was state-level arguments. It was a bit of a mess. But what we started to discover were videos and photographs of a what's known as a Book missile launcher. It has a large missile system, 4 missiles, and there were videos and photographs of it being transported supposedly through eastern Ukraine. And this is where geolocation comes in. We need to know where those photos and videos were actually taken. So we then use things in the background to help us identify possible locations. So there's one photograph that was taken. You have a missile launcher is transported on a trailer. You can see that clearly. You can see it's like a gas station forecourt, and in the background there's a shop with a name on it, but the shop's in Ukrainian, and I don't
Right.
speak Ukrainian, but someone on the internet does, and they'll Google it and they'll find a result and share it, and then you kind of find what they're sharing, and you kind of Google translate it to make sure it's correct, and it gives you an address, and then you can search for that address on Google Maps, and it takes you to that spot where you can see the satellite imagery where there is the gas station. And in that specific case, we didn't have Google Street View, but we did have a guy who drove a car around with his dashboard camera on, playing very loud music, and then posting it onto YouTube with a list of the streets he's driven down. And that included the name of the street that we were looking for, which turned up in the Google search result. So
Did the
that
music play a
one guy-
part, or was that just he liked to jam? Like, I don't get the reference for the music, or was he just like a
I just
huge
think
fan
he
of Iron Maiden?
stuck an album on, drove around for 45 minutes, and uploaded it on YouTube.
I see.
And
I see. I thought that was like some sort of tricky.
No, it's thank God for people with their weird hobbies and YouTube, because that allows us to see the actual location from the ground, see the shop sign, see the gas station, see all the little details that, again, confirmed where this was taken. And then what you can also do, once you know the exact location of a camera, took an image, you can use shadows in that image to tell the time. So this is something we call chronology, establishing the time of day. You also have as well people posting on social media about seeing this. So we search through all the kind of Facebook pages, vKontakte, which is a Russian Facebook media channels, where there might be people talking about seeing this thing. And that's something that's really useful for kind of building a network of information around one object, basically. You're trying to confirm it in as many ways as possible. So with the MH17 investigation, we're able to do this with multiple images and build a timeline of the movements of this missile launcher and show that it was heading towards the suspected launch site of the missile within the correct time frame to be involved with the launch of the missile. There were photographs of smoke coming from this field, satellite imagery showing it was burnt out, and other information that then would confirm this was the launch site. So it's all kind of building up all that information from just the internet.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff because it seems like basically a Twitter video becomes GPS coordinates by crowdsourcing where this might be and using tools. One of the apps that I thought was fascinating was you mentioned you have to know what time of day a photo was taken, and there's an app that looks at shadows and GPS coordinates and says, at this location, at this time, this shadow would have been this, so this is 2:35 p.m. approximately, Ukrainian Standard Time or whatever. That is awesome. That is so ninja somehow.
It's all these little tools that you find. I mean, there's something like that. That's SunCalc, but another tool we've developed ourselves allows us to, because we make our own tools at Bellingcat as well, which do fun things. What it tells you is if there's shadows a certain length and you know the time of day, you can say where in the planet it's most likely to be in a kind of band. And it's kind of reverse engineering and turning these things around from their expected purpose. Another tool that used to be useful allowed us to do kind of geofence searches for photos. So you could select an area on the border of Russia with Ukraine and then find all the Russian soldiers posting selfies from their military camp, which is useful for us because then we got to have a good look around and see what was in their military camp.
Right.
And then, I mean, we did a video for Vice probably back in 2015, 2016 called Selfie Soldiers, where a soldier had taken a selfie inside, a Russian soldier took one inside Ukraine. And then we geolocated the photograph and then managed to track the guy down to his hometown in the east of Russia. And Simon Ostrowski, who we worked with, went and actually door knocked him and kind of tried to say hello, and then immediately got arrested by the Russians and flown back to Moscow very quickly.
Wow.
Because it was exposing a lie that Russia was saying that there were no Russian troops in Ukraine, but we were finding troops, missile launchers, tanks, a whole army there.
Yeah. Hey, there's no one in Russia. Well, except for this guy who literally posted a selfie in front of a missile launcher with a tank behind it saying, I'm in Ukraine. It's like,
I mean,
yeah,
it was
cool.
Some stuff was like they would paint logos on their tanks in Russia and for the USR and stuff like that. Then they'd end up in Russia being filmed and photographed. And then they come back to Russia and do a bad job painting over what they'd written. And you could still see it through the paints in like their regiment photos.
Yeah.
So they were really, really bad at hiding themselves, doing a war in another country.
Yeah, people will say, oh, it's because they don't care. I mean, they do care. There's just a lot of ineptitude and corruption and just sort of ridiculousness. One thing I thought that was quite fascinating was the idea that you can fingerprint missile launcher. It's like the side skirts, so the thing that covers the treads, I guess, or the wheels of a missile launcher. It's like they get dinged, they get dented, they get shot at, they get hit by branches, rocks, trees, God knows what else. They bump up against other equipment over time, and that pattern of dents and scratches and whatever is pretty unique. Well, it's unique to that particular missile launcher. So you can get a high-res photo of these things and say, here's this one in, I don't know, the east of Russia on a train. Here it is on the border of Ukraine. Here it is in Ukraine. Here it is in another part of Ukraine. Here it is in another part of Ukraine. Here it is back in Russia. We know this thing went from Russia into Ukraine. It's not enemy equipment that the Russians are saying it is. It's not something that never left the country like the Russian. I mean, they just can't argue with that because it's like, well, then how come this has the exact same scratch pattern? They just have to ignore it or try to bury it or like you said, arrest the journalist that found out about it.
In our case, it was more about claiming that, first of all, we were amateurs who didn't know what we were doing, and then later that we were working for MI6 or the CIA or whoever was the popular spy agency of the day.
Well, that's what you and I have dealt with. I don't expect you to remember who you've replied to on Twitter, but I routinely would get, hey, you should interview Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat, or you should interview Christo Grozev, and then someone will go, they're a CIA front. And I think it was you or Christo who says, I would like any evidence that we are a CIA front. And of course, they never respond to that, ever. But that's happened at least 5 times to you and I, and or you and I and Christo, because we get the suggestion and then immediately whatever bot or whoever's looking for everybody tweeting it, anything with you, and the go-to is they're just a CIA front. And it's like, sure, show one thing that says that might be the case, and they can never do it. It's just more ad hominem nonsense.
What becomes really apparent to me, having gone through those kind of conversations a lot, is how really they are being informed by a very small kind of information ecosystem, because it's always the same arguments. It's always the exact same quotes that they're using to support their claims. They can never actually address the claims directly because it's usually a quote that was from the head of the National Endowment for Democracy, who funded us for a few years. And he said back in 1990 that I think it was a Washington Post piece, that a lot of what that the CIA used to do 25 years ago, we do now.
I see.
So the conspiracy theorists say, well, that's proof that they're the CIA. But what actually happened 25 years ago was the CIA was secretly funding pro-democracy organizations. And when that was exposed, it caused a huge scandal and damaged the reputation of those organizations. So the National Endowment for Democracy was set up to be more transparent about how the US was supporting democracy. But the thing is, that context is completely stripped out of it because they only ever see that quote on a website that's quoting that original article to make a point about Bellingcat being evil.
Sure. It's kind of a dense, I mean, it's not a very convincing argument because one, it comes out of nowhere all the time. And two, it's kind of like the argument isn't very well thought out. It's always, I'll reply to those people and I'll say, hey, you tell me, why shouldn't I interview the guy from Bellingcat? You let me know why they're a CIA front. And they'll say something like, look at the techniques they use. And it's like, okay, so looking at stuff on Twitter and social media and geolocating it is a CIA tactic and only the CIA can do it. I guess there are tons of people in every country in the whole world who are not getting paid, many of whom are like high school kids, and they're just all in the CIA now? Is that what your argument is? Or it's almost the same thing. It's not quite as dumb as this, but it's very similar to, the FBI, they drive cars. And so if you drive a car, you must be part of the FBI. It's like, well, a lot of people use Twitter. A lot of people use the internet. A lot of people are curious if something was taken, a video was taken during the Syrian civil war, or if it's from a video game called, whatever, Arma 2025 or whatever the realistic looking ones are, where they're like, look, it's the Iron Dome, and it's like, nope, this is the intro from a cutscene, and so it's just kind of it's always a ridiculous argument. I get it, like paranoid weed smokers who are unemployed sitting at home, everything is a conspiracy and everything is the CIA, but like the foundation of that argument is always just so weak. Anyway, I don't want to go down a rabbit way. I don't want to waste more time on these sort of people because you're doing important work here. How did you identify this gap in the information system? In your book, you wrote, politicians and officials with far less of an understanding of the Syrian conflict than I had were making decisions on whether or not to go to war. And that's pretty scary. Like, you're looking at Twitter and social media and news stories, and you're saying you're in many ways better informed than a person who's going to sign off on a bill to, I don't know, arm the opposition in a country. That's scary.
Well, it was really frustrating for me to watch the UK parliamentary debate about the August 21st, 2013 sarin attacks in Damascus, because it was really clear, as someone who was really studying that attack carefully, I had like images of the missiles used. I could show they'd been used previously and all kinds of information.
Sarin gas is a chemical weapon? This is a chemical weapon attack?
Sarin, yeah. So
yeah, okay.
It was, over 1,000 people died, thousands more injured. But the debate was really based around the latest columnists that MP had kind of read at the time. It wasn't about their opinions. It was about just what they'd read recently and their biases. And a lot of it was informed by kind of the experience with the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So everyone was like, oh, we don't want to have another Iraq in 2003. But that was their kind of moral logic that they were applying, that they'd been through this experience. They know they'd been lied to. They know there'd been this terrible war. And there's no real accountability for it. So now they didn't want to get drawn into another war, so they were looking for reasons for it not to happen. Now, I'm not saying we should have bombed Syria, but I'm saying that if we're going to have a debate about something, it should be on actual facts, not just the opinions of a newspaper columnist you've just read.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm in the we should have probably bombed Syria camp. Not the civilians, obviously, but I could have done with some smart munitions against the Assad regime, but we won't go down that geopolitical rabbit hole just yet. So you're finding and verifying all this, which I think is quite important because, look, we can either trust mainstream media, which nobody does, we can trust the government, which now very few people do, or we can trust this essentially a group of crowdsourced third parties that just wants the truth, which is the main reason I would say why people in, say, or government actors in Iran and Russia want to say that you're part of the government, because that immediately discredits you, right? If it's like, hey, we're just third-party journalists trying to get to the truth. Yes, Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. It's like, we can either argue that didn't happen and try and really meet you where you are and address the actual argument, or we can accuse you of being part of the big machine, the big lie machine. That's much easier to do. And so that just sort of, to me, always proved that what you're doing at Bellingcat is really important, because if it's not important, people ignore you. If it's really important, people start accusing you of being a CIA, FBI, government shill, whatever it is. I just want to clarify, at this point that you're investigating the Syrian civil war, MH17, you're basically a blogger earning what, ad revenue? How are you funding any of this early on?
Oh, I'm doing crowdfunding, so I'm literally working off probably the equivalent of about $25,000 a year at best
Oh,
to
you
do all of
baller.
this. So
Yeah.
I'm
Don't
barely
spend it
kind
all
of
in one place.
yeah. So I'm being accused of getting millions from the U.S. government to do this, and I'm kind
Yeah.
of scraping by trying to pay my mortgage. But I
Right.
think one thing that's really important about this is that I've become really interested in the idea of why people don't trust institutions.
Hmm.
And that's not to say they should trust institutions, but actually, why don't they? It's very easy to say, oh, well, it's because of Iraq or it's Trump or, whatever it may be. But I think we have to have a much more serious think about this. And I think it's really about, you know, democracy kind of gives us a promise in a way. And it promises really that the functions of democracy is I define them as verification, deliberation, and accountability. We have systems to attempt to find the truth about the world. We have systems to deliberate that truth, and then we have accountability when we uncover what that truth may be. And that could be political accountability, social. It could be laws being passed. It could be people being arrested. Now, the problem is when all three of those kind of can't ask the questions that the public asks them, like, can I know the truth? If the answer is no, then you lose faith in verification. Can my voice be heard? And does it matter? If the answer is no, they lose faith in deliberation. And can the powerful be held to account? If that answer to that is no, then you also lose faith in the democratic process, the institution, the entire system. And I think Iraq in 2003 was a really stark example for a lot of people of the reality of that. The financial crisis in 2008, when people lost their houses and the bankers still got their bonuses, that was another very stark example to the public that actually none of these functions are actually being formed in democracy.
Yeah.
So we get a bit of hope from Obama, but then again, the same pattern repeats. And then I think we enter kind of almost this kind of crisis cycle where people really can't really name what the problem is because they aren't really that well educated about the functions of democracy. And then they get drawn towards more authoritarian figures who promise them the world, but they themselves rarely can deliver.
Yeah, this is a gripe that many, many of us have, I think. It's, well, geez, domestic politics route. Don't do it, Jordan. All right, why the name Bellingcat? How does this name come about? Because of course, it sounds like a cat with a bell on this collar, or what am I
right,
missing?
yeah. So
Okay.
it's a fable. So when I was coming up with the name for Bellingcat, I'm really uncreative when it comes to names. So
You're
I have
talking to a
names.
guy who's naming. This is the Jordan Harbinger Show. You don't have to apologize for a lack of creativity when it comes to naming things. Continue.
My first attempt was the opensource.com, which was terrible. But
Okay,
I had
that
a
is
friend,
bad.
Peter Jukes. He's a playwright, so I gave him a call, and I thought he'll know some clever words to use. And his first suggestion was, "What about belling the cat?" And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "There's a fable where this group of mice are very frightened of a large, ferocious cat. So they have a meeting, and someone suggests putting a bell on the cat's neck so they can be warned. But a very old and wise mouse says, well, who's going to bell the cat? Who's going to
Right.
be the one who's brave enough to do it?" And I thought that seems quite good. So I searched bellingthecat.com, and that was $4,000, and bellingcat.com was $40. So I went with that.
Yeah, smart. Yeah, it's got a good ring to it. How does, for those of us that aren't good at aren't English majors, how does that relate to the mission of what you do?
So what we're really trying to do is kind of, in a way, expose power in a way, but show people how to do that. It's kind of coming back to those ideas of verification, deliberation, and accountability. We're very much about all of those three things, but accountability is the most important. It's kind of like I was talking to someone today about WikiLeaks and the work that they were doing by publishing all this stuff. But I always found the problem with WikiLeaks is often they didn't see themselves as part of a system of accountability.
I see.
It was more like, we'll get the stuff out there and then, accountability will happen. And
Right.
that's not how the world works. You need those systems and processes in place. And that's as much as part of our mission as it is doing the investigations.
I agree. I also feel like, again, another rabbit hole I don't totally want to go down, but I also feel like WikiLeaks turned into, I'm going to exercise this power that I have, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, I'm going to exercise this as power by strategically leaking Hillary Clinton stuff during the election. And it's like, that wasn't about, hey, everybody needs to know everything, regardless of how damaging it is. That's like, I'm going to pull this lever because, haha, I can, and you can't stop me. And that was not really what I was looking for in an organization like WikiLeaks, honestly, because I'm all about, like, get the information out there, accountability. That's why I like Bellingcat. That's why I previously really liked WikiLeaks. But I just think they just kind of jumped the shark in many ways with that.
Well, I think the Duma leaks. So basically, in 2018, there was a chemical attack in Duma in Syria, and WikiLeaks published emails that what they kind of framed as kind of undermining the OPCW investigation, which is the official investigation by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Okay.
But they were leaked in a very selective way to purposely damage the investigation. The thing is, I kind of look at this through the lens of kind of a moral logic. That often when we look at people in the other camp, we can see them as being immoral, that somehow they are, bad people because of what they believe. But really, they're following their own moral logic. So in the case of WikiLeaks, they know the government lies. They know the government likes invading countries by claiming they've got WMD. They know they've been targeted for telling the truth. So in their moral logic, they're actually doing something that is a moral act. But for me, that moral logic can actually capture your behavior. That when you're led by your moral logic in terms of who's the right person who can say things, who's the people we ignore, who are the Bellingcats, who are the CIA, then what you're actually saying is a large amount of information doesn't even need to be looked at. That we can just automatically say, no, that doesn't count. And that creates a kind of process which is fundamentally flawed in trying to actually come to the truth and establish accountability, because you aren't starting with the idea that we need to verify information. You're starting with the idea that you need to filter information, the good information versus the bad, based off my past experience of dealing with a completely different situation. But now I'm so almost morally injured by that situation, I'm now applying that to every situation.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Okay, so take us to a holy crap moment where you're muttering into your coffee when a shaky Instagram clip clicked as courtroom grade evidence. And I know that's not we got you with this one little thing. Maybe a good example is some of the cell phone metadata stuff where you exposed the GRU. I know that's not an Instagram post, but I would love to hear that story, because I think the cell phone metadata thing is just one of those, like, you can just see the GRU going, how did we not cover that one? Damn it. Somebody got fired for that.
Well, so for a bit of context, Russia is an incredibly corrupt police state, which means that a lot of information that the police state gathers is actually for sale. And it has been for a long time. I read an article from about 15 years ago in the Financial Times about a market that was selling DVDs of Russian databases in Moscow. And, it's just stuff like that. So all this information was quite easy to get access to. Now, normally we wouldn't use this stuff, but the Skripal poisoning was a rather unique event. So Sergei Skripal was a former Russian spy who defected to the UK, and several years ago he was poisoned. And it became a huge thing in the UK because a few months later, two civilians picked up a perfume bottle that had been thrown away, and it turned out it contained a nerve agent, the same one that nearly killed Sergei Skripal, and it did actually kill one of these people in that situation. So at that moment, we didn't have too much information, but then the UK police released the identity of both of the suspects. And a Russian newspaper purchased the flight records of the flight they flew in on, and their passport numbers were there, and they were literally like 5 or 6 digits apart, which is really suspicious, because there were two supposed strangers who had very close passport numbers. And our colleague thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we use this kind of data market in Russia to buy their passport registration forms to, just see how they filled it in. And we're thinking they surely wouldn't have stamped, Secret Service and put the Russian MOD's phone number on there. But that's actually what they did. They had actually stamped it with, Secret Service and the phone number of the Russian MOD. And that was like, a real oh God moment. But that was just the start of it, because then using all these Russian databases, we could find their entries in like Moscow, where like in 2012 they didn't exist, and then 2013 they'd been living there for years. So these identities were clearly fake, but they were also linked to addresses and phone numbers. And eventually, as part of this investigation, we were able to get phone metadata. And it allowed our investigator to take all that metadata. So it was not just who they'd called, but every single cell phone tower their phone had pinged as they were carrying it.
Oh my
So it's
gosh.
basically like a GPS for their whole route that they've been taking. And we were able to track them throughout Europe, showing that they'd visited other locations shortly before there were mysterious like warehouse explosions that were later connected to them. And this was all in their phone metadata. But also we could see them phoning up their commanders. One fun thing is that there was three top phone numbers. It was their boss, their wife, and their girlfriend. Always the
Mhm.
top three phone numbers that they were calling. But one of the guys was also the head of the chemical weapons lab.
Oh,
Where
their
they were
boss, their
secretly
wife, and their girlfriend. I just caught that. That's funny.
You'd often see in the phone calls as well, wife, girlfriend, as they're clearly trying to organize their
Oh
evening.
my gosh.
And then, yeah, so one of the guys was the head of the chemical weapons production lab, which was secret at the time, that produced these chemical weapons. And when Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, was poisoned, his phone metadata, which we were still able to get hold of, showed him shortly beforehand talking to officers of the Russian intelligence service. We got their phone data and showed they'd been following Navalny for a long, long time on all his trips, including the one where he was poisoned. So the Russian state's fingerprints were all over these attempted assassinations.
Wow, this is it's a little tangential, I suppose, but I love how you find these Skripal poisoners and they're registering their vehicles as well to GRU headquarters. So it's like, oh, where's his car registered? Oh, this is a weird address. Let's find out where that is. Oh, it's not residential. It's the headquarters of the GRU, so the Russian CIA kind of, right? So then it's like, oh, I wonder who else has registered their vehicle to this building. And you find all of these supposed top secret covert agents traveling all over the world. And it's like, here's 24 people who have all registered their cars to the Ministry of Defense GRU office. Very covert, guys. And I would imagine now every single one of those agents is blown because once you find out who they are and find out what they look like, they can't go abroad and pretend that they're tourists looking at a church ever again.
Well, there's that, and also the other issue they had is they actually got the passports when they faked them. It seems like they were given like a batch of passports that were sequential,
Yeah.
and then whoever faked them would print them all out. But it meant that we discovered several passport numbers of a range of about 150 numbers. So you can safely assume every one of those 150 numbers in between it are likely a Russian agent of some sort.
Oh,
So
wow.
immediately, even without knowing who they are, they're at risk if they're traveling abroad. So I think what we did
Right.
was very, very disruptive for the Russian intelligence services, and that certainly put us on their radar.
Yeah, that cracks me up because all that the West has to do is go, did anybody within this range of 150 numbers travel to any country that we have access to their immigration database? Okay, where's the photo that they took when they entered? All right, here are photos of every Russian intelligence agent. Wow, that guy, okay, he works at an embassy. This person has non-official cover. Every single one of those people is blown, even if they change passports because they can't change their face and their fingerprints. So that's a multi-million-dollar setback for their intelligence service because covert agents are expensive to train. And if you blow 150 of them at once, that is years and years and years of work. I mean, it might even be like a decade of work.
But what's started happening now is you're getting Russia using, basically Telegram channels to find people in the West who will be paid, £1,000 to, burn down a building or throw a bomb into a warehouse or something like that. So they're kind of outsourcing kind of their intelligence operations because those people get arrested and that Telegram channel disappears, and then
Right.
they're the ones who have to bear the brunt of it. So it's kind of like a cheap way of doing espionage, but it's also not a very effective way of doing espionage because you're dealing with just ordinary members of the public who are trying to make a quick buck.
Yeah, I can also imagine that's a great vector to get into something, right? Like, okay, I'll take this, and then I'm just gonna. The FBI certainly must be all over that particular vector. I mean, if somebody proves themselves good, you can eventually, I would imagine, lure these people out of hiding. Who knows? I love that this is the alchemy that turns a duck face Instagram story into prosecutable intel. I mean, I love the idea that these Russian soldiers are taking photos like just on a little vacation to Ukraine, and it's like you can imagine a year later their commander or somebody in the intelligence office going, why did you do that? Why did you all right, new rule, stop freaking posting on social media, you morons, which I believe now is a rule in the Russian military.
Yeah, they actually passed a law at the State Duma to actually make sure that soldiers couldn't share information about their military service. There were a lot of more photos being shared of mobile phones being nailed to the wall when people were using them when they shouldn't have been using them. So they got very, very strict on that because it was incredible the amount of information we were finding. I remember one guy invited his girlfriend into their military camp and she just filmed it and posted it on social media. Just it's just really silly things like that. Or like the wives, girlfriends, and mothers of soldiers in Russia have internet forums where they discuss what's going on. Like,
Right.
oh, my son's just been sent off to this training facility on the border with Ukraine. It's like, okay, let's find out what he's up to. Like with MH17, we identified that the missile launcher came from the 53rd Air Defense Brigade in Kursk in Russia. First, by following videos that Russians were taking of this military convoy back to the base. And this was like a 500-kilometer distance, and it's just people filming it across the route that gave us where they came from. But they had a social media account, the actual brigade, and all the soldiers were following the social media account. And we spent a year basically mapping out their entire military unit with names, faces, ranks, where they were on the day of the convoy, whether or not they were in the convoy. Like that whole thing was just all there on the internet. It's just no one had pieced it together. But it's a network of information, and if you can explore those networks, you can find gold.
I'm going to laugh when in 20 years someone's doing a history of the Russian regime during the Putin era, and they're like, man, these Russian records are really sloppy. Who's got the best records? These Bellingcat guys have the whole organization mapped out, and it's better than what we got from the Russians. Because that's very possible that they don't know who's in whatever unit. I mean, it's actually quite possible that your data on that unit is better than what they have in Moscow.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a real mess out there as well.
Yeah.
And it's just so... what I love about this is there's always kind of new doors to kind of open and walk through. Like people often say, "Oh, aren't you worried about Russia stopping soldiers from posting, or aren't you worried that people figure out what you do?"
Yeah.
And it's kind of like if they figure out what we do, then we've got like lots of other options to use because
Sure.
the thing with the internet is it's constantly kind of evolving and growing and new stuff's out there and there's new problems with websites which means you can find leaked data or all kinds of things. So there's never a point where I think, well, we've done everything and there's nothing more we can do because there's just so much.
Especially you're talking about buying databases that are leaked from Russian sources, and Russia's, like you said, a deeply corrupt police state. So, okay, what can we do to fix this? Well, you can fix your entire society so that people at the cell phone company don't sell tons of metadata records for $1,000 or $500. What do those even cost? Can you give us a ballpark of what you've paid for these?
Well, it was my colleague Christo Grozev who he was buying it with his own money, which I'm not sure his wife was too impressed with. He kind of spent that by this point, which includes a lot of investigations, like $150,000. But record by record, it would be like 20 euros for someone's flight data, for example.
Wow.
So it's not like breaking the bank. But now with Bellingcat, we really try and focus on purely open source material because it's all about being as inclusive as possible. And, it's not just about, allowing people to see our working, but giving them the ways to actually do it themselves. And if we start saying, oh, you have to buy a Russian database for $150,000, that immediately starts kind of, excluding people.
It does. I just think it's quite funny that the solution to the only real solution to the problem that Russia has is fix the entire society from the bottom up so that it's not corrupt and people don't sell personal and private information for a pittance so that they can survive. Because they can't really plug that hole. It would be harder than disarming the gun owners in the United States, like from a government policy level. Okay, no more corruption, or what? It's a crime? It's already a crime. Well, we're going to start enforcing it. Okay, if you find out about it, but you're not really because I'm going to bribe the police when they find me, which is what I've been doing for the last decade.
This is it.
I mean, they're screwed.
You find this time and time again that it's the thing with Russia that it's corrupt from the top all the way down to the bottom, and the people down the bottom know that the top's corrupt. So why the hell shouldn't they be?
Right, exactly. Especially because what's the harm? It's just flight records. No one's even going to find out that I'm the one that sold it without a massive investigation, which they're not going to do for 20 euros. It's just not a thing. You ever scroll past a trench selfie and just think, okay, congrats, you've just geotagged your own indictment?
Well, I've been actually quite impressed in terms of this current conflict in the way that Ukraine has really stopped that kind of stuff coming out too frequently. They're very controlled on that. On the Russian side, it's very similar. There have been cases early on in the conflict where, a Russian soldier posted a photograph of where he was in Ukraine, and very shortly afterwards, that place was destroyed. So we know the Ukrainians are looking for this information. I think that's partly because, Bellingcat before the 2022 invasion, spent 8 years doing open source investigations, not just on MH17, but Russia's other involvement in the conflict. And within Ukraine, we had a very high profile because of our work. And I think that actually really influenced the way the Ukrainian intelligence services then approached the conflict. They realized open source was a fantastic source of information for what they were trying to do. So you've really seen, I mean, the conflict in Ukraine has been quite remarkable in that regard, but also things like the use of drones in warfare, a huge development that I think sometimes people kind of underestimate is really going to change the way wars are fought.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
definitely.
yeah, I mean, we've seen kind of how the shift in how the internet works, how we've moved from a kind of top-down media model where we have newspapers and TV kind of telling us what's going on to this kind of more peer-to-peer, many-to-many network where everyone is kind of like the point of contact for information. You're the one who verifies it, you're the one who shares it, and that can be very dangerous but also very powerful. And in conflict, you're seeing the same patterns happen again and again where you have the people who are trying to tell us what's happening in the conflict from these official sources constantly being undermined by people like Bellingcat, who are actually saying, actually, this is the stuff that's coming from the ground that shows that you're actually lying about this. And that's something that I think is very powerful for the truth.
I agree. Look, you're not a career spy, unless Twitter is to be believed, soldier, or even a traditional journalist. And it seems incredible that. So, would you say you had no formal training when you started uncovering state-level crimes and assassination plots?
Literally just figured this out with a whole bunch of internet, and then somehow it worked.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment where you were like, I'm in way over my head, or was it like, screw it, I've already come this far?
Yeah. Oh, I'm thinking that right now. I mean, I think that every single day, every hour.
I bet.
But I think it's also, for me, really important to kind of not turn myself into the hero of this story, because the work that we do at Bellingcat isn't just about me. It's about our organization, our community, the people around us. It's about the stuff that we do where people learn from us and they go off and do it themselves. That's the stuff that really excites me, when other people do their own kind of Bellingcatting in some other subjects I've not even thought about. Because to me, that's showing us that there's value even beyond what I can imagine in terms of what open source investigation can do.
I would have loved this probably back in my social engineering days. I mean, I remember mapping out the MCI at the time, was the telephone company, telecom network of Iraq before the war. And we were showing, I mean, this isn't like In Pursuit of the Truth. We were kind of doing some patriotic stuff, I guess, because I'm old enough to remember when America was the good guys. But we mapped out the telephone network, and the idea was we were going to take it down. But it was just very similar stuff. It was like, use some social engineering here, request some documents there, pretend we're these guys, get the MCI blueprint for Baghdad and surrounding areas. And it was just like, we just did that. And we're a bunch of random teenagers and college kids. This is pretty cool. I remember the kind of high when something clicks and you go, I can't believe we just got away with that. And you didn't do anything illegal. You just put stuff together. And I have to wonder, have professionals, war crimes prosecutors, maybe even intelligence agencies come to you and said, wait, how did you figure that out? How often are three-letter agency folks and prosecutors sliding into your DMs? I guess that's my question.
Well, we avoid the intelligence services because otherwise it'll be a Twitter thing.
I think you should. Yeah, that makes sense.
But in terms of kind of prosecutors and stuff like that, so with the MH17 investigation, in a few months after we started doing our work, I was invited to my local police station to talk to the investigators.
Invited.
I spent about 8 hours just going through every single post we did line by line, and I kind of now realized that was me actually giving them a free workshop.
Yeah.
But I think they were really impressed by how every kind of line we wrote was based off a piece of evidence, and that we explained our conclusions very clearly. I heard that several months after that, they set up their own open source unit within the team who are doing the investigation. But now, I mean, most recently, we've been working with the International Criminal Court on investigations related to Ukraine. We've designed a whole process to do investigations specifically for war crime investigations for use in places like the International Criminal Court. So for me, it was really important to say, it's one thing to have an argument with someone on the internet and say, I've got all these pictures that prove that I'm right. It's another to go to a courtroom and present to a judge that you have enough evidence to convict someone.
Right.
But that's the standard I want to kind of meet with the work that we're doing, because there are plenty of crimes that we've documented throughout our work, and some of them have led to real accountability, but the vast majority don't. And my question is, how do we actually make accountability something that happens more frequently?
Yeah, look, it's tough. I mean, as an attorney, I know talking to a judge who doesn't understand the evidence you're showing them is very frustrating. I mean, I've been in litigation where I say, look, here's this person doing this and this and this. And they go, well, that's the internet. Anybody can post that. And I'm like, but it's coming from their account. Here's the IP address. It's mapped to his house. Well, that might be fake. And it's like, why would you assume that it's fake? That is so much harder than assuming that this is potentially real and taking it into consideration. And they just go, I'm throwing out this whole binder of evidence where this person literally confessed to everything. And it's like, because you don't understand how the web works, you're going to throw away literal confessions and all of this evidence. And like, it's kind of like, I would imagine people now are going to go, that's AI. And it's like, no, that's you shooting someone in the head. Well, it's AI. And it's like, oh gosh, how do we prove this? It's just so frustrating because a judge read a TikTok, watched a TikTok that showed fake AI, and now they can't believe any photographs anymore. It's like, oh my God.
Well, this is the kind of risk with AI. For me, it's not about kind of tricking people into stuff they kind of wouldn't believe anyway. It's actually, it creates a permission structure for people to deny reality, because now they can
Right.
just say, oh, that thing I don't agree with, it's AI. And we see that happening all the time already. But for me, a lot of this is really about how different communities create permission structures to deny reality by, saying Bellingcat is the CIA, or that's AI, or you can't trust that community or this community to tell the truth. And you hear that happening just all over the place now, and it really undermines just the fundamental principles of democracy, that if we can't establish some form of shared truth, then we can't even start discussing what to do about it. And I think you're seeing this kind of fracture happening more and more, not just in the US but all over the world.
The crazy amount of depth that you go into to find the intelligence, I love it. I mean, is this you've already given a brief overview of finding examples of Russian soldiers entering Ukraine, but I just want people to appreciate how complex, how exhaustive this is, I should say. You look up their family members, everybody who comments on any post, look up those people, their profiles, all of their photos, and you can really find sort of this 3D full image, and I mean this in sort of not necessarily an actual image, but you get this impression, I should say, of who this person is and where they've been, and is this legitimate, because it just becomes impossible to fake after a while when grandma's like, I miss him so much. Well, he's in this place. No, I thought he was over here. He was in that place earlier. And you just map the whole thing, and it's like, well, that's probably not fake. And then all Russia can do is go, fake news, and just pray that people don't look into what you're doing. You're really combating disinformation, especially against Russia in this case, and doing a good job of providing real intelligence proof. Are you not worried that Putin, who, by the way, as you have yourself seen, seems to have no problem killing people he doesn't like, even if they live in the UK, are you not worried that he might have you a string and your picture tied to someplace on his wall? I mean, by the way, do you want a refill on your tea, or are you good for now?
No, I'm good. I think, yeah, we've had people followed. I mean, there's just 6 Bulgarians convicted in the UK because they were spying on Christo Grozev for 2 years. And that was directed by, this is such a weird story. So Jan Marcelik was the head of the chief financial officer of Wirecard, which is a financial transaction company in Europe. And he disappeared with about $1 billion. And he reappeared based on what we were finding, taking a flight basically into Russia. And he ended up actually being the person who was running a 6-member Bulgarian team who was spying on Christo Grozev and planning things like kidnapping, murder, breaking into his apartment, all kinds of different things. And they've all been convicted now, but Jan Marslik is still on the run. But it looks like he's been a kind of proxy for the Russian intelligence services, running this operation on their behalf.
Wow.
And the whole thing is very, very bizarre, because there was, like, in the trial, a photo produced of me sat with Christo that one of the spies had taken, during their spying of him. They followed him on multiple occasions. They broke into one of his apartments, a whole bunch of stuff that was very disturbing. But at the same time, what we do is important. And this is exactly what those people want. They want people like us to be scared off actually trying to find the truth. And I say hell no to that, because it's important. And if we let the world just be run by people who want you to shut up, then it's going to be a very dark place indeed.
I agree with you. I would imagine you, at least if you're not getting followed, broken into, attempted poisoning by the Russians, they're at least hacking Bellingcat. I mean, Russia has groups like Fancy Bear and other cyber sort of offensive cyber units. are they working? Do you find, hey, our systems got deleted, this got deleted, this got penetrated, this got all scrambled, this got stolen? I mean, surely the office has some great cybersecurity, but it's probably also getting pinged every day, all day by groups like this.
I mean, they certainly try. We were actually targeted by the same phishing campaign that ended up with the Podesta emails being published during the 2015 campaign with Hillary Clinton. They sent us the same emails, but we saw them and thought, this is misspelled. They misspelled like Google and stuff like that. It's really obvious. So we just thought they were like some kind of Nigerian prince scam thing going on. Turned out it's the Russian intelligence services trying to hack our emails.
They just don't
they
run
tried
spell
that
check.
again with Proton email. There was a period I used to do a lot of speaking events in public, which I do less now for security reasons, but there would always be someone from the Russian embassy sat at the back taking notes on what I was saying. So I always like to say,
did you wave to them and say, hey Vladimir,
yeah,
I'm glad you made my talk.
Them to say, yeah, hey, how you doing? And then we've had various cyber attacks against us. We've had lots of disinformation, state-backed different information campaigns, both kind of Russia Today going after us, but also covert campaign. There's a really weird campaign that's going on at the moment, the Russian doll campaign. So what Russia's been doing for the past few years is they make videos that mimic the style of legitimate news organizations. And that's kind of like France 24, the BBC, all kinds of news organizations, and Bellingcat. And we're like, oh, well, that's nice. They're included us with all this international media. Yeah. And one thing they do, they'll deep fake audio. So they'll have a deep fake version of me saying Ukraine's bad and that kind of thing like that. But they do loads and loads of these. And we noticed last year they started including barcodes with verified written on each of them and a little jigsaw puzzle piece. And I thought, that's weird, but I didn't really think about it anymore. Then in the last week, they've started a new campaign. And again, these jigsaw puzzle pieces have come back, but now they're kind of larger and clearer. And I've started piecing them together. And the jigsaw is a big pile of poo with my face on it, with the title, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, you go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, it's shittings of belling shit. And they've put this in their disinformation campaign as a jigsaw puzzle, apparently specifically for me to piece together.
Right.
And someone said they'd pieced together the previous puzzle, and it was CIA, but with the Bellingcat logo as the eye, FBI with the Bellingcat logo as an eye, a slur, and then a middle finger. That was the jigsaw puzzle. So these Russian trolls, for some reason, have decided that I'm the one they need to communicate with through these kind of weird puzzle pieces.
Wow.
But it's so why?
This reminds me of, oh God, I might butcher this, but there was a hacking group, this is several years ago, where they were finding little bits in the code, and that was how they identified, I think they were like North Koreans. And then when they tried to do that again to another hack, they put the bits of code that were out of place together, and it said something like, screw you, capitalist pigs, or like, screw you, America, or screw you, CIA. It was because they were like, this is how they found us last time. Well, we know they're going to look for that again, so let's just put this little insult in there. And I can't remember if it was North Korea or Russia, but yeah, it's interesting because this is like their spies going, I'm just going to put this one. It's like, this is the intelligence equivalent of writing something on a missile that lands in the enemy territory, right? It's like, oh, they're not going to see it. They might see a photo of it later. They might find the piece after they drag it out of the building we hit, but it's going to say something like, screw you, Yankees, or whatever. But it's the digital equivalent of that. I mean, it's kind of funny, but at the core level, it's still a little scary, right? Because it's like, these people are really thinking about me a lot.
I don't know. It's kind of one of the nicest things anyone's ever done for me. I've got my own jigsaw puzzle now. I honestly want to print it up and get all the pieces and build it and frame it, because it's just...
You should.
It's such a weird object now, and I love weird objects. It just kind of like, it's almost like a kind of outsider art piece that kind of is specifically for me.
You should absolutely put that in the office. I mean, and when people ask about it, you can tell that story. I mean, it's absolutely a great story. Tell me about the effect that looking at all of this stuff online has on people working at Bellingcat. I mean, we talked about some of the dangers you face doing this. We talked about Putin maybe not trying to kill you, but cyber threats we talked about. Authoritarian regimes are always dangerous. But what about psychological issues? Because aren't Bellingcat researchers looking through lots of war footage, lots of airline wreckage with people's body parts in it, and it just, after a while, that makes you, it's not good for you to look at that all the time.
Well, People tend to handle it differently, and that's not to say there's tough people and soft people, but it's just I think people, are kind of built differently psychology wise. I've never had too much of an issue with the kind of violence of it because it's almost like y- you have to learn to kind of disassociate yourself from the person. It's really about the image and what the image is telling you about something. You're looking not at the kind of bodies, but the missile parts, and they might be there. Um, but we have like a psychological support at Bellingcat. We're very open about talking about things around trauma. There's other types of trauma that sometimes are a bit easier to miss. So there's the very obvious trauma of seeing all this horrific stuff, but then there's moral injury that you know when you're doing this stuff and you're looking at hours and hours of horrific footage, and then you go on Twitter and someone's saying that's fake news
Hmm.
and being really abusive about that, that really heightens kind of your sense of injury from that.
Sure.
That you're so offended at a deep level that actually can be very, very serious in a lot of people. So it's kind of assessing that as well. The fear of the threat from Russia as well is something that some people find overwhelming. So what we try and do is at least create spaces where people can talk about that. One on one, we talk about it as a team. It's important to have that healthy environment. I know when I was kind of first doing this, I would hear tales from certain human rights NGOs, which I won't mention, where when they were first encountering this imagery for the first time, coming from places like Syria and Libya and Egypt, they were kind of told just to tough it out because it wasn't real. It was like a picture on the internet. You're not out there in the war zone. You're here in an office, nice and safe, because they didn't really understand the dangers of vicarious trauma. And that's also something that I've really kind of put at the center of like how we deal with our staff at Bellingcat, that we make sure that's front and center, not something we just say, get on with it.
Yeah, it's not safe to do that. I mean, PTSD, a lot of people who have been in war zones have this, and there's other people in the military who might have just worked at a warehouse in the green zone, and their PTSD doesn't get taken seriously because they didn't see any combat. But when you see people coming home in boxes and you see people at the hospital, I mean, it still affects you. It's still that vicarious trauma. And also, the more familiar something is to you, the more it could hit you. I mean, what one example I think that was in your book was what happens when you see a toy that your own child has in airplane wreckage, and then you immediately, of course, you're thinking, oh, this is from a baby that was in that plane that crashed in Ukraine.
I had the same issue as well. So there were around the time my children were born, there were quite a few chemical attacks in Syria, and I would see, like a baby wearing a nappy that was the same brand as my children's, who'd just been hit by chlorine. I was like coughing up bloody mucus because of it, and that kind of stuff. I mean, that is because it's kind of like you can kind of compartmentalize. But then when you see something kind of almost subconsciously that you associate with your real life, it just brings you right back into that moment and makes it very real for you. And you've kind of got to know about those moments because that will happen to kind of anyone doing this work. And that's the kind of moment where you stop. There's a temptation to say, now I must really look into this. But that's the moment where you have to kind of stop, step away, and give yourself that chance to just process what you've just seen. Because trying to kind of push through that is a really, really bad idea. And it's just going to make things worse.
All right, just a quick break. I'm going to tell you about something that'll actually make your life easier. If you're thinking about starting a business or you already have one and maybe logo or branding design is not your strong suit, you're going to love Design.com. With Design.com, creating a standout logo is as easy as it gets. You just pop in your business name and your industry, and in seconds, you're going to get thousands of custom logos to choose from. Every design is handcrafted by top designers and exclusive to Design.com, so you're getting something unique. Once you find a design that you like, you can customize the fonts, the colors, the layouts to make it yours. Then you download all those assets and you're good to go. And Design.com doesn't just stop at logos. They've got tools to help you create all of your branding materials, from website to social media posts to business cards, all perfectly aligned with your brand. If you already have a logo, you can upload it and you get instant access to thousands of design templates that actually match your brand's look and your color scheme. So this tool saves you a lot of time. It lets you focus on growing your business instead of getting stuck in the weeds with marketing materials. With a 4.8 star Trustpilot rating, Design.com is legit amazing. It's run by a friend of mine. The company's been around for a while. They really do care about their customers. Try it for free at design.com/Jordan. That's design.com/Jordan. All right, everybody, this video is brought to you by HVMN, and it is worth hearing about, especially if you're looking for appetite suppression. You ever try fasting, then your stomach starts planning a mutiny around hour 14? Enter Ketone IQ from HVMN. It is a great tool for appetite control and clean energy. It helps suppress ghrelin, that's your hunger hormone. It helps boost leptin, your fullness signal, so you feel satisfied even without food. Plus, it gives your brain and body clean fuel without breaking your fast. So you're still in ketosis, you're still burning fat just without the hanger. It's like telling your cravings, not right now or not today. Fasting is hard. HVMN makes it a whole lot easier. Try Ketone IQ. Go to hvmn.com. Enter promo code Jordan for 20% off Ketone IQ. How will Bellingcat try to fight things like deepfakes and AI? You touched on that earlier, but it seems like that is just a major enemy of what you're doing here. I took an AI training on Monday that was run by a friend of mine, and he showed me something that took him, I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes, and half of that is waiting for the computer to do its thing, right? And it was a girl riding a boat, it was a woman riding a bicycle, and she just sort of went back and forth on the bicycle side to side because it was on a stand or something. And then they did modify video, and it became her with different hair, slightly different face, full makeup, a different outfit, on a motorbike going really fast in an urban environment. And I said, wow, this is incredible. He goes, it was about 14 minutes for me to make that. And like I said, half of it was waiting for it to render. And it's like you can essentially film yourself in a garage waving your hands around, and then you can say, turn this into a torture scene with ISIS, and it will just make that. And how can you combat that?
I think it's really about this idea that kind of the verification part of how we kind of build our understanding of the world used to be done by institutions who really had the control of the knowledge we had. It was kind of really documented well by Walter Lippmann, who wrote a book in 1922 called Public Opinion. How basically, rather than actually having a full understanding of the world, we actually have that mediated through gatekeeped institutions, for better or for worse, and we build what we call pseudo environments about our understanding of the world. So now what we have is we've all become the verification element of that process, because we're seeing this stuff for the first time. So it's up to us to make the decision of whether or not we share it or even look at it for long enough for the algorithm to notice that we're looking at it for too long. So what we need to do is really lead this by education. There's no silver bullet where we can say, oh, there's a piece of software or a course that you can take. We need to actually create an education system that's based around critical thinking skills, not fact checking, not media literacy, but fundamentally across all subjects, critical thinking skills.
I like this because media literacy is one thing, but now you've got to be on the bleeding edge of everything, and it's scary. It doesn't bode well for people like my dear parents who really can't tell an advertisement on the internet from a news story. And I was reading, this might have been in your book, but I was reading somewhere something like 80% of middle school students also can't tell the difference between an ad and a real news story. And my mom will ask me something like, oh, did you know this? I just read it in the news. And I'm like, show me the news story. And it's like a thing she clicked on that was an ad inside a newspaper that takes you to a blog that is definitely just marketing that sort of looks like the same newspaper where they ran the ad, depending on where you come from. And I've seen that ad elsewhere, and I started clicking on it, and it just, whatever they've done, they've made several clone sites of whatever site where they run the ad, and it knows which site you came from, and it's just designed to look like another article on that site, but it's just an ad for some product. And like, this is the weight loss miracle everyone's been waiting for. And it's like, no, this is not real. It's an ad that looks like CNN.com. I can't believe they allow this. And I'm sure that they try and combat that at some level, but they're also being paid to promote it. So it's just like, you really have this massive uphill battle. But with AI, even if some of that stuff looks rough now, it's kind of like, oh, well, it's just bad acting, or it's corny acting, or the dialogue seems stilted. But within a few months, all of that could be more human-like, and all of the glitches that you sort of see with your brain and go, that doesn't look totally real, all that's going to be resolved. So it's almost like you train someone to look for that, and then 6 months later, the company, Adobe or whatever, fixes that. And you're just always like, here's the update. Now you got to look for this because the other thing got fixed. I can't do this. Is how I feel old. I have to ask 20-year-olds on Reddit why something is fake because they go, that's fake. And I go, crap, how do you know? And they got to explain it to me like the lighting is too good. And I'm like, oh, God, I would never have spotted that.
Yeah, it's also something that is catching out mainstream media in some countries. So there was a recent conflict between India and Pakistan where a video emerged that showed a Pakistani general saying that 2 aircraft had been shot down by the Indian military. That was then picked up by the Indian media, who kind of trumpeted this great success, but it turned out the audio and the lip movements had been deep faked, and that this
Wow.
person hadn't said it at all. But it took me having to go through the YouTube channel of the kind of Pakistani military media, to find the speech and match his arm and kind of face movements with the fake video to show that what he was saying had been changed, to actually categorically prove that. And that takes time. If we don't train media, not just in our own countries, but you've got to really do it internationally, because everything is an international thing now. A story that's reported in India will be picked up, in my hometown of Leicester, and then become the fact of the community who lives here. You need to teach everyone these fundamental skills. And if it can't be about here's how you fact check a TikTok video, because the next generation might be using something completely different. It has to be about how do you actually think about things. And we're really actually often very poor about teaching students that. Certain countries are better than others, certain US states are better than others. But generally speaking, it's not taught broadly enough. It's like an add-on. It's like, oh, now you're 16, you can take an extra class on critical thinking.
Hmm.
No, it has to be the minute you're starting school, you're being taught these skills. And it doesn't have to be like, how do you fact check a fairy tale? But it can be kind of just little questions that teach children to ask an extra question when they're looking at something, and then build it from there. And there's already education organizations doing this, like Cambridge Education is starting to do this. Bellingcat works with universities to develop course material around not just critical thinking, but actually implementing open source investigation ideas, creating investigative hubs at universities. All these different things have to contribute. There's not one solution. It has to be a whole of society solution if we want to really deal with this problem.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know what that curriculum looks like, but I would love to see that implemented. And I think countries like Denmark and I think Estonia and the Baltic states have done a really good job with this, because they were getting bombarded with Russian disinformation, I think, since the 90s, aside from when they were occupied, which was obviously a massive disinformation landscape that they couldn't do anything about because they were under the thumb of the Soviet Union. So they kind of realized how important this was early on. And if you when I talk to Estonian and Finnish, for example, show fans, they're the first people to be like, oh, this is just a disinformation campaign. And I'm like, oh, cool. Oh, they're the online equivalent of me asking the 20-year-olds how they know something is AI, because they go, this has all the hallmarks of fake Russian news. Look at this. And I'm just like, wow, I would never notice that. I would never, ever pick that up. And we need that here in the States. I routinely have friends of mine go, have you seen this video? And it's something from RT, which is just a Kremlin mouthpiece. And they go, this is the only legit news source in the US now. And I'm like, no, this is actually just completely fake. And I'm sad that you believe it.
That's interesting. I ask, why do they think that? And it always comes back to how these institutions have had their trust completely destroyed
Yes,
across large
exactly.
sections of society. So part of the solution is, yes, we need to teach these critical education skills, but we also need to teach people how to engage in democracy, and even what the value of democracy is. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street, why is democracy important? You're going to get an answer that, oh, I get to vote and help what happens in this country. And they don't actually really dig into that at all. It's kind of like almost we won World War II, so we beat fascism. Then we had the 60s and 70s, so we fixed racism and sexism. And now we kind of got managed into the 80s, where we all got to make lots of money if we worked really, really hard. And now we're in a situation where no one trusts anything that they're being told, because what actually happened was all these institutions that were used to kind of deal with these issues, these what are known as counterpublics, were hollowed out. That we were taught that democracy is healthiest when there's free markets, that everyone can work really, really hard. But there's this idea of negative freedom and positive freedom. So negative freedom is what you're free from. So freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. We get lots and lots of that in Western democracies, which is great. But the positive freedom is like what you're free to do. Are you free to actually influence the democracy you live in? And we don't really have that anymore. It's like we're still also living in a system where, if you want to become a politician, you go to a great university, you work really, really hard, and you get an internship. And by the time you're in your 30s, if you're lucky, you might be elected to some office where you might have a bit of influence. But
Right.
now in the current system, you can do that, or you can just go on Twitter and just make a lot of noise, telling people what they want to hear. And now you're an influencer in a political system that is so broken that everyone's constantly thinking why everything's going wrong without actually examining the deep-rooted issues that are behind it, and they just point their finger to Clinton, Trump, Democrat, Republican, when really it's a much, much deeper issue, and what we're seeing are symptoms of those issues. So yeah, we need to start with critical thinking skills, but you also need to think about democracy a lot more and teach students about that in school, because it's not obvious now to a lot of young people why democracy is important. And it's really obvious to a lot of older people that democracy doesn't work the way that we've been told it works. We have a media culture that tells us about the kind of lawyer fighting against, the bad business. You've got the police officer solving crimes, that if you find the evidence, if you expose it to light, you'll find justice. Is that really what you feel that, America, the UK, Europe is about at the moment? No. I mean, every
No.
time you ask those questions of like, does my voice matter? No. I mean, maybe you get to be a big influencer and, maybe have a voice then, but as an individual, a normal day-to-day individual, does your voice matter? Can you actually find out what the truth is? Well, you've got a Fox News truth, you've got a CNN truth, you've got a Trump truth, you've got a Democrat, you get given the truths that you want to hear rather than the truths that actually exist. And then finally, it's like, can we hold the powerful to account? Do you think we can hold the powerful to account at the moment? Because it
course
certainly
not.
doesn't feel so.
No, of course not. Man, this has been fascinating. How do people join Bellingcat, or is that not something you're looking for?
Well, we have a Discord server. It's got about 40,000 members on, and that's
Okay.
a great community. Often we'll actually identify investigations the community are doing and help them finish it and publish it, which is great fun. We have a volunteers program that people can sign up for if they want to really get into the weeds of it. That's very popular, so you'll be waiting for a while, but that's fun. Read the website, go to our YouTube channel, just see what we're putting out there and see what inspires you to do something.
I like that. So are there ways for folks to start learning this stuff at home? Is the Discord server kind of the best place to find those resources?
Well, Discord's a great place to find like-minded people. If you go to the Bellingcat website, we have guides and resources. The YouTube channel has hands-on kind of case studies where you can watch our researchers explain how to do stuff. Yeah, I'll just say, give it a go if you're interested, because, that's what I did, and I turned out quite well.
Elliot, based on what you're seeing right now, open source intel, troop movements, intercepted communications, or at least I should say communications people are putting out in public, is there any sign that Russia is preparing for anything major, or is it just kind of meat grinder until Ukraine has to call a stalemate?
Well, it seems every time they're expecting something major, it just turns into another meat grinder.
Yeah.
And it just seems to constantly Russia builds up to something. Sometimes they gain some territory, but ultimately it's kind of, it's like a meter of soil in World War One. People just dying over tiny strips of land.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say the conflict, I never like using the word stalemate, but it's certainly getting to the point where no side really has a clear way of winning. Obviously, with everything that's happening with arms supplies from the US at the moment, that puts pressure on. But, the Ukrainians aren't collapsing, Russia isn't collapsing, and it's just going on. We're on day 1,200 or something at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be in for the long haul still here. I think the peace efforts at the moment are ridiculous, that Russia clearly has no intention of sticking to any peace proposals. And we know from the past that any ceasefires are just an excuse to rearm and reorganize. So, yeah, it still looks like it's a long road at the moment.
Have you clocked any odd blips like supply train surges, rail traffic at 2 a.m., sudden radio blackouts? And this is all kind of the open source intelligence kind of stuff. Is there anything that screams, all right, brace yourself, something massive is coming?
Nothing that's obvious. I think the kind of real thing that we need to be watching carefully is how much impact the huge Ukrainian strike on Russian air bases had on their ability to actually launch missiles. Because a lot of the platforms they hit were being used to launch these long-range missiles that Ukraine was really struggling with. And if there's a perceivable drop in that over the coming months, then we can say that's had a really, really big impact, and that will help Ukraine a lot. But the difference between a Russian airstrike is it hits civilians, whilst a Ukrainian airstrike tends to hit military targets. And I think we have to always remember that.
Yeah, for people who don't know, you got to look up this foot. We should link this in the show notes. The Ukrainian drone operation to take out these planes was straight out of Call of Duty or some sort of Xbox classic. I mean, it was like, I didn't follow it super closely, but it was like containers that had a hidden compartment that were all put on legitimate Russian transport trucks that were driven around at the same time. And then the tops were remotely opened. All these drones flew out, flew to air bases, landed next to billion-dollar aircraft and detonated, blowing them all up. And it was just like, and then Ukraine goes, I know they're going to arrest somebody, but it's all fake because everybody who was involved in this operation has been safely back in Ukraine for months now. So just wait for Putin to announce that they've arrested all these saboteurs, but it's just a bunch of BS. And of course, Russia's like, damn, not only did they blow up our planes, but they calculated our next move, put it on blast publicly. What do we even do besides cry? And now it's like, what are they going to do? It just shows the ingenuity of asymmetric warfare. It's like the planes they blew up were super expensive, probably mostly impossible or very difficult for Russia to replace, and they were blown up by modified DJI commercial drones. It was just unbelievable.
Well, one thing I really liked is it appears they set the home location of each of the drones directly on top of an aircraft. So when they lost connection to the drone, because it was leaving the transmission area, it just went back to its home location, landed on an aircraft, and detonated. It was a really kind of nice trick they programmed in there.
Right, so it's like, jam the drones. Okay, all right, all the drones are going home. Wait a minute, they're still flying towards us. Exactly. It's just like, no, we already thought of that, guys. Thanks for playing. Unbelievable. Brinkmanship is Putin's favorite sport, but on your dashboard, how close are we to him just flipping the table over, you think?
I don't know. He has a lot to lose. This is the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is almost like a managed conflict now inside Russia, where they're still drawing soldiers from the kind of outer regions of Russia, rather than really kind of the danger areas like St. Petersburg and Moscow. And I think as long as they can still keep the war out of that, then they have an opportunity to kind of just keep going for a while. But, there's economic issues here that are starting to become more and more apparent. But I think it's always a fool's game to predict the end of a war. I remember, 8 years ago being asked when I thought the war in Syria would end, and I just said it's just going to keep going because there's no clear advantage to either side. But then if you look over at Syria, that seemed like it was going to go on forever.
It did.
And then it just collapsed within a week, and all of a sudden there's a new government, as in Russia, and you can. I would. It's a fool's game to predict where conflicts go. I would always advise people.
I agree. I mean, nobody predicted that Iran would get totally decapitated in Lebanon, which would result in them having to pull Hezbollah resources away from Syria, which would result in Assad falling, which would result in it was too many chess moves ahead, and it was almost. I think for most people it was an unintentional. I'm sure Israel was stoked, but I don't think that was like part of the plan to also end the Syrian civil war. I think it was a would you look at that kind of moment that for the Mossad, as opposed to a yes, we knew this would happen kind of thing.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think. I mean, for someone who's worked on Syria for a long time, it was kind of a really big moment for me to actually see that happen. I thought that would never happen, but also the new Syrian government aren't doing too badly compared to what they could be happening, but there's still big problems that are present there. So I think Syria is still something we need to keep an eye on, but it's more to look for the signs of kind of regression into the old system and opportunities to support them actually building a new democratic system.
Mm-hmm. I agree. What hard signals, maybe not just saber rattling, what hard signals suggest that the Kremlin is baiting NATO into a gloves-off brawl, or do you think that they're trying to not do that?
It's always hard for me to like kind of really put a finger on that, because there is a certain amount of brinkmanship. But I think when it really, really comes to it, I mean, if you're Putin building your billion ruble mansion, do you really want that to be turned into radioactive dust?
Yeah.
No, you want to get to the point where you can kind of retire comfortably in your giant mansion, make sure you're replaced by someone who's going to keep you in the style that you're accustomed to.
Right.
And that doesn't happen if there's a all-out war between Russia and NATO. I mean, he certainly has kind of imperialistic ambitions in terms of Eastern Europe, but he's also relied on the weakness of NATO. And there's certainly a wobble there at the moment, but I think Europe is picking up a lot of slack. And I think that maybe have even surprised Putin at how much they've actually, risen to this moment.
It surprised me. I will say I was surprised that Europe went, oh, we can't count on the Americans. All right, let's start doing that. I thought they were going to kind of go, oh, well, we'll wait till the next U.S. administration comes in because we can't do anything. I've been quite impressed with what the Europeans are doing. Honestly, I was surprised. Not necessarily known around here in the States for having the backbone that they are now showing. Russia, where do I even begin? Oligarchs are falling from balconies, windows, whatever, from their hospital or their home. Scientists are meeting freak accidents. Russians seem to have a lot of bad luck, or is there kind of a coordinated purge going on? I'd love for you to walk us through a case where the fingerprints clearly scream Kremlin, even if the victim wasn't the usual political enemy.
I mean, I mean, usually when we've been doing these investigations, Russia has actually preferred to use poison rather than throw people out of windows, but that might just be more for political dissidents more than, the friends they've fallen out with. I think, though, sometimes I think we can start seeing patterns where they don't exist. I think we also need to appreciate that um, a lot of these people who die sometimes without context seems it's like really, really strange they've died. And then when you look into them, they're like raging alcoholics who've been ill for a long time and
Right.
they've died. But there are an awful lot of people who have a tendency to fall out of Russian windows.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the way Russian windows are designed.
It's
need to kind
their
of
building
start-
code is clearly terrible and needs
Yeah.
to be revisited.
That's the
Yes.
issue here.
We often hear rumors of discontent among Russia's inner circle. Has there been any credible evidence that you can point to, or chatter even suggesting that elites inside Russia might want to get rid of Putin? I mean, factor in war fatigue, sanction squeeze, shrinking fortunes. What do the odds look like on a inside job coup, or is he too powerful?
I think the problem people, these Russian oligarchs have is that their source of power and wealth comes from Putin and how society has been organized around that. So, um, I mean, there's not really. I mean, there's been chatter, but there's always chatter about people being unhappy. But it's about the actions that take place, and we're not seeing anything. The last person who tried to stand up to Putin, Prigozhin, he ended up, exploding in the sky. So, I mean, that sends a pretty clear message to anyone else that if you're going to fly over Russia in your private jet, you better make sure you're not pissed off Putin because he will shoot you down.
Man, there's a lot more to talk about, especially with respect to disinformation, but I guess it'll have to wait until next time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah, there's no problem. Glad to be on.